Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast set to exist simply to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia. I am a podcaster and writer and podcaster here with Victims and Villains, and I'm joined by my That's High Praise co-host, Mr. Micah Kimber.
What's up, VH Zest? It's good to be here back on Victims and Villains. It's been a little bit. I think this is my third, fourth episode.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I'll keep him in the cage.
That's where I like
once
to
a
be.
month I'll let him out. But we are joined by artist, writer, comic creator, Mr. Brian Wingrove from Bare Butt Comics. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing all right. I'm doing okay. Just kind of nice to be here, and hopefully the audio and the video will stay up and won't suddenly lose me.
I'm used to technical difficulties as a producer by now, so if it happens, it happens. And we are going to be talking about the adventures of Baron. How do you say the last name? Munchausen.
Yeah.
From 1988. So, Brian, before we jump in and talk about the movie and the strangeness of this movie, tell us a little bit about your comics.
Sure. Barebutt Comics is something that I've been doing for a while now. I started actually printing and putting them out in 2008. That was mostly because I was drawing them my whole life and figured I had to just get to a point where I needed to do something with it. It was an obsession that I've had for a long time. And it was just a point of, every so often you have to just take stock of what you really want to do and just shut up and do it. So I put out Barebutt Comics. There are a few things that I've got going on with it. The main title that's been going since the beginning is called Intermezzo, which is a superhero action comedy. So it's all my own original characters, all my own original stories. I do the stories and the art. My wife comes in and edits it for me to help me keep things focused, settle any sort of odd looking things that I do now and then. That pair of eyes. I've done 16 issues of that. I've got several smaller one-shot stories that have popped up that deal in that same universe. And then I've got a new project, new-ish. I'm finishing up on issue 4 right now. We're hoping to get that printed very soon. It's called the Mighty Mighties, and it's a very kid-friendly Saturday morning cartoon world of public domain superheroes. So it's taking a lot of these old characters that have come and disappeared into the ether, bringing them out and giving them a new life as if they had their own Saturday morning cartoon world. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I for one have I've read. I own the first 2 copies of Intermezzo. I own the first issue of Mighty Mighties as well. Those are the only 2 that I've spent time with. But so they're awesome. Honestly, I really enjoyed the Mighty Mighties is definitely for kids, but you're right. Like it really has a cartoon feel to it. Like it feels like I'm reading, but kind of watching, like the old Super Friends cartoon. It has that kind of playful like feel to it, and it's a lot of fun. And Intermezzo, man, I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew it was not for kids, not in the sense that it's explicit, but it was just more of kind of like I guess you'd call like a maybe mainstream is not the right word, but a mainstream feel to the storytelling and the characters and things like that. And I loved Intermezzo. I felt like I've only read issue 1. I own issue 2. I still need to sit down with it. But I really felt like these are characters that were like, yeah, you know what? If my friends and I, for whatever reason in the world, became superheroes, this is probably the awkwardness that would happen. We'd probably refer to our apartments as clubhouses. We would probably try to have meetings, and it would probably be a little more casual, a little less epic, and but it was really funny. It was really charming. Yeah, I for one am very excited to read more. I would love if there was a subscription.
That's true. It's one of those things. Whenever you're doing a small press, the mechanics of things and just getting it visible to people is really the biggest challenge. Particularly, most of the comic artists that I know, we get into it because we're artists and we've got these stories we want to tell, or pictures we want to draw. We've got all these ideas, but the business part isn't necessarily what we are good at, what we are familiar with. So
Sure.
It takes you from sitting at your art desk, drawing something that you're passionate about, to suddenly figuring out, how am I supposed to sell it? And particularly a lot of us are riddled with self-doubts and, self-criticisms and all that sort of stuff. So suddenly putting yourself in front of people and saying why this is great and why you need to buy it isn't our comfort zone. Our comfort zone is the creating, not necessarily the business.
Right. Yeah. I remember, when we first met and we talked a lot about, because Brian and I in particular met at Statesville Comic Con in North Carolina. My wife is actually from there, so we had a decent connection there. And we talked about how, you'd wanted to do comics, you've done art. And I think a lot of creators, their idea is, if they're comic fans, that they want to work for Marvel and DC. They want to work for Image and Boom and Dark Horse and things like that. But I remember you telling me you sort of got to this place where you were like, well, my goal is that I want to write and create my own comic books. I can do that regardless of, if I have a publication backing me.
Right.
And I really admired that. I think that's really awesome. I think that you're right. As a creator, a lot of the business, public sort of marketing aspects can be what we struggle with, or what we're simply unfamiliar with.
Right.
But I really admire that you just create, and you just do it, and you seem to have a really good feel for the convention circuit around this area and stuff, and I think that's really cool. Yeah. So do you still consider it a goal of yours to perhaps work for a larger company, or do you simply hope for maybe better publicity for what you do now, or perhaps a larger publisher to pick up what you do now, or I guess moving into the future, do you have sort of goals, or are you just doing your best with where you're at and enjoying it for where it is?
It's a bit of a mix, really. I think I would be open to doing work with other companies. I've always picked up some different things here and there from people that are doing something. They say, hey, we need a pinup, we need a few pages of art for the story. So I've done some things as they come available. I want to get out there and put some stuff together and just generally do some things. Indelible Comics has been getting together a lot of stuff. I've done a couple of stories that are going to be in their Crackajack comics. So it's an anthology where I'll have some artwork in it. So yeah, I think I certainly would go to a company that is looking to do something with something of mine, I don't know how much I would really want to give up. It's a creative thing right now. I don't know if suddenly there was an editor standing over you saying, "Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that." Then I don't know. That's a bit of an uncomfortable thought, honestly. But I certainly would like to see what I do grow. Everybody would, I'm sure. And but it is still primarily for my own fulfillment, my own enjoyment. Certainly when people read it and enjoy it, that's a huge part of that. Whenever you do a convention, I've got lots of things that I'll have for sale, and the comics are usually the cheapest things on the table, but it's also the thing that if you sell a comic book, that's more of an accomplishment. That's more of a feeling of just pride that out of all the comic books in the room, they have picked one up and they want to read one of mine. That's more of a goal, I think, than while I have lots of sketches and art and different things that people get, the comic books are really why I'm there.
Yeah, it's from someone that's done press, a lot of press in the convention circuit and like sitting down and talking with independent creators. We have an event coming up Saturday, or after we're recording this, and so like I'm going through my comic collection, and I have like just so many like independent DIY titles that I've accumulated over the years of doing press, and I honestly think that like it is really rewarding to like from all the friends that I've had like said that it's like it's one of the best feelings in the world when you can sell your book over a print, because with a print you can be like, oh hey, like this is Kermit doing Ash from Evil Dead, or something along those lines, but the that is unique in and of itself, but like the ability to like sell something that like you created, you wrote, you drew, like you put your blood, sweat, and tears in it is something else entirely.
Oh yeah, definitely. And if people are wanting to honestly meet an artist and see what they do and really talk to them about it, and sort of set up that dialogue and things like that, buying a comic from them is the perfect way to go. You'll get a nice hello, polite, thank you very much. But if you buy their comic book, they're going to remember you. Those are the potential readers are the ones. That's why you're there.
Yeah, it's one of the things that like we've strived over the years to do with Victims and Villains is to like support artists, and like that's why we started a film festival this year, is to support the growing community of indie horror and indie cinema. And that's why I love sitting down and talking with artists about their projects, because it's like at the end of the day, it's like you might be coming here because you're a fan of the movie or the TV show or whatever we're talking about, but at the end of the day, we want you to also support local artists and creators, because like they're doing this because it makes their own mental health like at peace to do this kind of stuff. And you never know like what kind of connections and community is birthed out of just sitting down and asking someone about their project and their vision for creativity.
Definitely.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Okay, so I have a question. It's a little on topic, but a little different. So I was saying to my wife the other day, I love really dated ads in comic books, and I think that like mid '90s and before, like it's just fascinating and fun. And I noticed something in a lot of independents, even some of what you might consider the bigger independents, the guys like Image and Dark Horse and stuff like that. You see little to no ads, and I noticed reading Bare Butt, that's that same deal, little to no ads. So I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how like ad space works in comics, but what I assume is that someone pays a flat amount of some sort, I would assume, and their ad is featured in a comic, and that comic gets published and goes out. So is that something that you as a comic creator have explored or are interested in? Like I've been thinking about, like doing podcasts like this is predominantly what Victims does, but it'd be really fascinating to be able to partner with creators in a way that is maybe a little bit more intimate. So would that be something that is possible for you, whether that comes to Victims and Villains and our podcasts or just our, nonprofit, would that be something that you'd be able to do? Or when it comes to anybody else who may hear of you and maybe want to partner with you in some way, is that something that you could facilitate where like you're able to maybe sell a page in one of your comics?
It definitely would be something that would work. Primarily, it is that sort of flat rate, and so it's very easy to work in there, honestly.
Sure.
It's just a matter of either leaving space in the book. If you've got a 24-page book, make sure you leave enough room for ad space. Or if it's a larger project, you can always add more spaces. So, instead of a 24-page book, you'd have a 28-page book.
Sure.
And up with some stuff that way. What I think you don't see it much anymore is probably because of Kickstarter and the funding aspect of it. So it's not going out to a business and getting advertising that way. You're getting your money from the potential market. That's sort of a new kids thing for me. I'm a little old for that. It's never been my thing. I'm personally happier just go ahead and print the book and then just move it around. The only downside to ads for an indie comic like that would be because if you put an ad, say you put in my next comic book, there's no telling when somebody's going to buy that book. It might be 5 years from now. So you don't know, there are things I've seen where people will advertise certain comic book conventions, and it's like, well, 5 months after that book is out there, the convention happens and the ad doesn't do anything after that.
Right.
So as long as you know that it's not that same sort of market life that a typical stand, newsstand book would have, you can plan for it, and you can definitely make that sort of thing work. And I bet a lot of independent creators would love that sort of thing, but
Cool.
it's sort of finding where that market would be. But I think advertisers would sort of have a good choice of finding somebody who fits the style of what they're wanting, and
sure,
a lot of stuff out there.
Cool.
You would also have to go after advertisers that are consistently timeless, almost, to your point, because of how, and I think a lot of people underestimate independent comics and production too, of how long it takes, because a lot of the guys that you're meeting on the convention floor, that's not their full-time job. Yep. I know we talked about this, Brian, when I met you at the last con we did in Wilkes, that while so many creators love doing this, at the end of the day, it's always just it's a passion project for them. And so I think my buddy Jason does comics. It's his side hustle. And I want to say I've known him for 4-5 years now. And he's maybe done, I think he's on his 5th comic issue now. So it takes a long time to do these issues. And like you said, Kickstarter really kind of changed the game when it came to production wise.
Right. And that's part of the challenge that you have, is since it's a lot of times a 1-person show or a 2-person show, since it does take so very long, trying to build an audience when they don't know when the next one's coming out, or in a lot of cases, if the next one's coming out. A lot of people get that first issue out there, and the second one just never gets finished, or whatever. There's a lot of real life that gets in the way, that you got to pay the bills and you got to do all this stuff. And so being able to keep putting out a comic book and doing it regularly is a big challenge.
Yeah, that's also the downside of supporting artists, is like I said, I was going through comics before we started recording, and there was one that I picked up in Philadelphia a couple years ago called I think it's Third Midnight Society or something like that. And it was one of the most, the art was simply stunning. The writing was it was that gateway horror. It's not quite hack slash, but it's not quite Goosebumps. It's kind of that sweet in between. And the lady, the lady that wrote it, just never came out and did another issue with it, and it ends on a cliffhanger. So it really sucks.
Oh, see, my brain won't let me do that. If it's a cliffhanger, I've got to finish it. It's the feeling that all these characters are sitting in your head saying, what now? It's an obsession that just, I wouldn't be able to sleep until I knew I could get that next one done and get it out there.
Yeah. Well, we will grab socials from you at the end, but we're going to jump into this. I don't think this movie is so weird, but if you're not used to Terry Gilliam, this movie can be a little bit weird to handle the first viewing. And this was my first viewing of this movie. We're talking about The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I don't know if I said that right. Did I say that right, Mike? What you said, Micah.
Yeah. So Micah, a little bit of backstory. I'm I grew up on this movie. I've been talking to Josh about watching this movie for months. Not even for a podcast, just for months, just being like, Josh, I got to show you this sucker. Because I grew up on it, and it's weird. It just is. I mean, it's probably not the weirdest movie I've ever seen, but I would say, I can comfortably say it's unlike most other movies I've ever seen. And then Josh Snapchats me like a week ago and is like, hey, Micah, I've been talking with our buddy Brian about doing a podcast. You'll never guess what movie he wants to talk about. And it was this movie. And I was over the moon, or am I on the moon? And I still am about it. So I'm so stoked about this. This movie's amazing.
Well, as long as your head is still attached to your body, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, I remember seeing this movie 89 or 90. It was showing on college campus back when I was at East Carolina. So I didn't grow up with it, but it was a good time for me. And it's always, like you said, it's not the weirdest movie, but I think that combination of weird / fun / adventure is just a rare mix in it.
Yeah.
That makes it such a good watch.
Well, Micah, what we typically do with That's High Praise, we typically do a synopsis at the beginning of it. So the best you can, man, hit me with a synopsis on what this movie is, or give people that refresher to what the Baron is all about.
Okay. This is a weird task. Okay. Yeah.
I might have a good bridge, I think.
Brian, you go for it.
Baron Munchausen was a legitimate person from history. He really existed. He claimed to visit the New World before hardly anyone was here, and he came back with his tales of his adventures that were complete and total BS. But everybody believed him and thought was wonderful and wow, this is great. But then they get over here and they find out that there aren't sausage trees and all these wild things that he's been telling. So his name became just synonymous with just bold-faced liars. And so it's taking this real man and his real stories that he lied and made up and did all these fanciful adventures, and it puts it into a movie that sort of puts it as, what if it was real? What if he really was telling the truth? What if that's really out there?
Yeah. So we actually get in medical science, there's actually a disease that's named after him called Munchausen's, and the idea is that like you. It's kind of like the self-prophetic sort of deal. Like you believe that something has happened to you. It's like the next step in hypochondriac. Like you believe so much that something has happened to you that it freaking happens to you. That's the idea. That's what Munchausen's is. Basically, if my years of watching House have paid off. So
there's also Munchausen by proxy here a little more often, and that's more typically like a parent or something where they talk about how their child is ill and all this, and it becomes a thing where they are typically poisoning the child in mild ways to make the child sick.
Yeah.
So they get this attention of being the doting parent, the loving thing. So it becomes this making their own reality real kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. So the movie takes place in what's kind of known as the Age of Reason, late 1700s, I think, early 1800s. In some nondescript European city, you hear English and French accents alike, and the Turks are invading or attacking for a reason that's not known. It's just, it is what it is. The Turks are coming, right? Not the most PC thing in the world, but here we are. And so
1988 was a different time.
It was a different
entirely
time. But I will say, Mel Brooks had nothing to do with this. So it's a different time. But what's happening is there's this. The movie opens on this stage production of these people trying to tell about the adventures of Baron Munchausen. during this siege. You know, I know, like, I had grandparents who like to talk about the Great Depression and stuff. And historically speaking, it's very much the case that when a society is going through a collapse, that things like media are heavily heightened. Lots of like attention and funds are poured into media. Now, whether that's for the case of distraction or commentary or both, that's very much the thing. And that's very much what's happening here, is that this theater is just packed full of people despite the siege, and they're just watching this chaotic play about the adventures of Baron Munchausen, right? So
before you I just want to speak on that whole media consumption thing real quick.
Sure.
Because I feel like even now, as we're slowly kind of starting to get back to life, I mean, we saw that back in 2020 when the world started shutting down. Studios would essentially say, hey, you can't come to the theater, so we'll bring the theater to you. A lot of movies hit VOD. A lot of movies hit streaming services really early. And also, most notably, you also had celebrities that would do live streams. Like Andy Serkis famously read The Lord of the Rings, and did the voices for it for people on live streams. A lot of bands did a lot of music, so much so that I think they broke some services. But it is interesting to see kind of I think for what it is, I think it's more distraction than anything else, because I feel like mentally speaking, we don't want to deal with the terrors of the world. So you turn to something that is going to help you escape and not have to go through those terrors.
Yeah. And in the name of people like Bradbury and Orwell, you turn to something that not only will do that, but will help you provide commentary and make sense of things, and it's and that's kind of where this play really begins to fall apart, is that they get to the part in the play where Baron Munchausen goes to the Turk, and then Baron Munchausen himself comes in, and discussing the plot of this movie is strange. Because Baron Munchausen comes in, and then it begins to kind of switch back and forth between what happened and his account of what happened and what is happening now with the Turks, and then him going off to end the war because he's the only one who can, because he's the one who started it. And that's kind of the idea. That's the gist of the first act of the movie.
Man, I got such a different takeaway for this movie, I think, than what you did.
Oh, all right. Well,
because I mean, while it, yeah, a lot of what you're saying is true. He's eventually it's a road trip movie essentially, where it's him and a little girl that are basically trying to get the band back together for one last adventure.
I'm sorry. So, you said that, and my mind went simultaneously to Eurotrip and Country Bears. So I think you lost me just a hair. But I can see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think another huge point of that, while you have that sort of the real logic of that story playing out, it's also so heavily influenced by how everyone's reality is shaped by their beliefs. While you have Baron Munchausen doing things that are just blatantly impossible according to physics and gravity and all sorts of things. He's riding a cannonball miles through the air, and for him it makes perfect sense, and to everybody else it would be impossible. So it's how he sees things shaping that story versus how normal people would see it.
Yeah.
I love that particular scene right there. Sorry, Micah.
Yeah.
Just because it's one of the funniest moments where he literally rides a cannon and then somehow gets like a mile and a half down and then comes all the way back on another cannon. And they get back. He's like, he just flew several miles. He's like, well, actually, it was like a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. He rides this line between like, he wants to tell the truth, but you're going to be incredulous when you hear it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
go ahead, Brian.
All right. You've got that great imagery. It's a physical puppet back in those days, but that whole image of death chasing him throughout the movie, that creepy skeleton with the big wings and the scythe and everything just sort of popping up in different scenes is just this great little visual metaphor that also plays out, of course, as it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say that like we didn't really touch on that the other day, Josh, when we watched the movie, but like to me, that's like one of the biggest points of the movie is that like from the very beginning, you see literal death, like trying to come for Baron Munchausen, and whether you think of that as like metaphorical, being like, oh yeah, like it's sort of the turn of the age and the world itself is trying to end fanatics or believers or just these kinds of people, or whether it's just like Baron Munchausen owes some sort of debt to death and he's trying to cash in. It's very fun and very interesting and very gorgeous, honestly. Like I have a soft spot for puppeteering, but it's really great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talked about this when we were watching the movie the other night. Is like the way that this movie plays out. You had brought it up, Micah. Is it almost feels like a stage play,
dude? It
and
does.
when you're actually like watching some of like the stage production, because like as Micah said, like this movie opens up essentially on a stage production. And we're kind of like laying the groundwork like for who Baron Munchausen is, and through this stage play, like there are certain shots when you go behind the scenes to kind of show like this is like reality, that like there are certain shots that Gilliam sets up that just feel claustrophobic. And I'm not sure if I'm the only one that has done that or if I'm the only one on the call right now that was a theater kid in high school. But it like there's a lot of hustle that that comes with that lifestyle, and the way that you have those claustrophobic things like kind of showcasing the like a stark difference between reality and the play, I thought was really well done too.
Yeah, I love like kind of on a more cinematic angle, like you were saying, like the movie is like you watch the movie and it's like, oh, this is clearly a set. The whole time you're like, there's no way they found crumbling rubble and stuff. This is all very much clearly a set, but it all feels dirty and immersive and really well done. I don't know. I think you have, Josh, Brian. I don't know if you've seen like the live action Aladdin remake, but to me, that was the biggest travesty of it, is that the sets looked clean and polished and colorful. It was by no means immersive. And so even these sets, a lot of the stuff you may have been looking at was styrofoam or whatever at the time. A lot of these close-ups and stuff, which they had to be close-ups, and it almost has to feel claustrophobic because it's sets. But they are, they feel dirty, they feel immersive, they feel real, because of just that attention to detail and stuff. And even, I mean, we watched it on probably we streamed it, so by no means did we get a VHS quality of our experience, and it still felt that way.
I tried. I tried. I got the standard version, not the high def version.
Well, it felt great. A lot of times, being a VHS lover, part of the reason I love VHS is because sometimes the very medium itself makes the movie feel more to period. And this movie is so well shot that even within the clarity that we watched it, like it still feels immersive and genuine.
It's funny how you mentioned being a theater kid, because in college I actually was a theater major, design and production. So set design, set lighting, that was how I spent a good portion of my life there. So yeah, watching that, I spent a lot of time looking at sets, looking at the props. I mean, the things that always jump out at me, those battlefields that they had, all those big, giant, ornate cannons that were just everywhere. And, all pre-CGI stuff. So there were a lot of people working hard to make that thing. And I remember hearing, I can't remember which actor it was, but there were actors that talked about how arduous that movie was and how hard it was to make. And they said Gilliam, was a beast to work for, and just all this, that they were just so, almost tormented by getting it done, but it's one of those things, do you look back on it now with, pride as having gone through that sort of thing. But yeah, details everywhere throughout are what can make it so immersive. But then knowing that the actors are really in those sort of scenes, the Baron and Venus, when they're dancing up in the air, that wasn't just a CGI blue screen clip. That was those two people strung into flight harnesses and whipped around, having to dance while you're doing that. So it's just one of those things that has stuck with me for so long, and it's always been a very, very dear feeling that I get with it. And I think part of that is that creative aspect of it. It almost feels like that artist shaping his reality, with his beliefs and how he can change the world, that kind of feeling. But it's always just been wonderful. And I've always wanted to see more done with Munchausen as a base for something. I've seen a couple of cartoon attempts, but never anything that I think really caught it as well as the movie. And the movie was a lot harder to make, so.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, the movie's something. It's so cool. And it's something I noticed too on sort of the theater angle. So like toward the end of like the third act, maybe not even toward the end, I don't know, it's a little bit long of a movie, but so Munchausen is kind of followed and tagged along by this girl named Sally, and they there are some people who ask Munchausen like how they can help him, and he's like, "Ladies, kindly remove your knickers," and it's just this funny line. But he makes this big kind of dirigible, like hot air balloon, with a bunch of clothes and dresses and things, and they float up to the moon. They literally go to the moon, right? And so they're on the moon. And my point is to talk about transition here, not necessarily the moon. So after the moon, they fall down into a volcano. So, and they go from a volcano, they spend some time there. And again, this is not about the specific scenes. They go from the volcano, they fall through this like little small maelstrom, little whirlpool through the world, right? And they get swallowed by a giant fish. Very Pinocchio feel to it there. Explaining this movie bit by bit like this is chaotic. And then anyway, so after they're in the fish, they do the classic, like, you got to have a bit of snuff, and they get sneezed out of the fish and they're going up again. And my point in all of this, explaining these scenes and their transitions so quickly, is like, I pointed this out to Josh, like the movie is even built scene by scene like a play, because it's almost like every change of scene is the rising and or falling of a curtain or a backdrop.
Well, to both of your points, I think that if you're going to do a movie this cinematic, and Gilliam is definitely a director that has kind of done stuff like this. Like even even when you go back and you look at something like Mighty Python, the Holy Grail, like it always kind of has that stage-like quality to it. But to keep that stage quality and translate it over to the big screen, sometimes that transition doesn't always work. So what you need to do is you need to kind of park yourself at these set pieces for a long period of time. So you spend a significant amount of time in the moon with the kaiju. You spend a significant amount of time in the wormhole with Venus. Like, you spend all of these times, and as the audience, you're allowed to really take in all of the set pieces, all of the hard work, and really kind of immerse yourself in this world, and more specifically how the character sees this world, because this is all told through Baron's point of view, and this larger than life view that he has of not only the world but and his friends and all these adventures that he's accumulated over the years. Like this, I think you make it possible because you have these stunning set pieces, and the movie feels epic in turn.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Sometimes in these podcasts, Josh, I just don't know how to follow you up.
It's fine. It's fine. Well, I mean, we've talked about comics so far, and I'm not sure whether you're a DC fan or a Marvel fan, or you want to throw an Image in there with the Wildcats. The entire point of this movie is for the Baron to kind of get his band of brothers back together, and each brother has a very odd and unique superpower.
Yeah, he's a quirk, if you will. Yeah.
Eric Idle might be my favorite, to be honest.
Oh, true. Eric Idle. Well, Eric Idle is just Eric Idle. Like, he's fun. He has a ton of charisma. He's probably the most well-known of the actors there. At least I think he is. Maybe I'm living under a rock compared to the other guys.
No, same.
Yeah.
He also all those quick one-liners, the funny tension breakers.
Yeah.
They're a doctor in the, everything. He gives that, not a real world reaction to it, but more how if we were in that situation, what would we do? And a lot of scream and run away. So yeah, that's kind of what he brings to it.
Yeah, I think the one that I remember the most vividly is the Baron and Sally are on the moon, and they get locked in this cage by the King of the Moon, who's played by Robin Williams, by the way.
Brilliant things.
Honestly, it's so good.
Oh.
But anyway, after that, they're getting chased and stuff, and Eric Idle's character Berthold, he's like, they're about to leave the moon, and he's like, "Wait, you abandoned me here. I've been here for 20 years, and now you just want me to come off with you, gallivanting, and all this stuff." And he's irate, as anybody should be, right? If your closest friend or master or whatever like left you somewhere, you'd be irate too after 20 years. And he's lost all his hair and stuff. And the Baron's like, "Yeah." And Bertolt goes, "All right." and just goes with but yeah, you're right. He kind of like in some of the more fantastic points of the movie, it's Bertold that really kind of like grounds you to your own like sense of self and your own sense of like, yeah, he's just a really relatable character. He really is. I have a soft spot, I think, too, for what's the big guy's name? Shoot. The strong man. I forget what his name is. But anyway, he's like, I never wanted to be big and strong. I wanted to be pretty and dainty, and I like it down here. They call me their midget. And it's just like so funny. It's just so funny because he's surrounded by a bunch of people who are shorter than him, and he's huge, and he's playing this like maid, and it's probably one of the more like, yeah, I guess provocative feels like a weird word, but it's one of the more, I guess, provocative like kind of scenes in the movie. But it's so interesting and funny, and yeah, the movie it's without a doubt a comedy. But if you're used to comedies, it will probably come out of left field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the name. Go ahead.
It's almost a comedy with a philosophy behind it.
Right. Exactly. You know, I was thinking of this lyric. This might seem random. Kind of harkening back to earlier in our conversation, there's this band that doesn't exist anymore, and this lyric, and they were like, where are the prophets, the priests, and the kings? They've looked beyond nature for the nature of things. They've been ignored and called primitive men because their theories weren't fully evolved. They believed mysteries that science can solve, but I'm unsure that we're wiser than them. And I thought about that lyric earlier in regards to like this sort of contrast between Munchausen and the Age of Reason, and the idea that like this is a guy who he has probably maybe not necessarily a truer grasp on reality, or not a better grasp on reality, but a truer grasp on reality. This is a guy who like, you know, he's not highbrow in the sense that he's better than everybody, but he is, you know, the idea of like faith or conscience and things like that are much more accessible to him. And the idea of like, hey, the world is big and large and mysterious, and no one's living like it. That's my soapbox.
Well, I mean, it's good. You know, one of the things too that like I noticed about this movie is that, you know, very clearly in the beginning, also like, here you have Baron Munchausen, who is, you know, kind of coming to face with a satirical version of himself.
Yeah.
And so here you have like this imposter syndrome. And so he's constantly kind of having to prove his worth. But I think this movie, what it does really well is it speaks to the volumes of that. It's okay to be different, and it's okay not to stay in the crowd and kind of be what the crowd is, because you talk about like the Age of Reason, where all of this is kind of taking place, and the rest of the world kind of seems really dim and dark. And then you have Sally, who's essentially like needing to like believe into something like more pure. And so she turns to the Baron as kind of that escape, and kind of is taken on this like wild ride of like, oh, hey, like you're weird and you're not like everyone else, but that's okay, because sometimes stepping out from the crowd is the best thing you can do. And even speaking from a mental health perspective, it goes back to the idea of you don't have to fill up to society, and it's okay. It's absolutely okay not to be okay, or not to fit in with the rest of the crowd. And on that note, one of my favorite lines in any superhero movie comes from Batman Forever. Batman says it to Chase Meridian, and he says, I don't blend in at family picnics. And I quote that movie all the time, that specific moment right there, because like, to me, it's my signal to say like, I'm weird. I don't look like anyone else in my family. I don't listen to anything else that any type of music my family listens to. I don't watch the same movies as my family. Like, it's okay to be different, and it's okay to stand out and just be true to yourself.
You're here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think like, yeah, you're right in so many ways. That's like, that is, I don't want to say it's the point of this movie. I don't want to box up the movie, because I think to some extent the point of this movie is that the Age of Reason was about boxing up the world. It was about rationalizing and reasoning and making logic out of everything that we, were learning or had understood, but yeah, I think that's so valid and so important, is that, like, even the guy, the actor who is like portraying Munchausen in the beginning of the movie, his whole thing is like, he just wants to be credible and successful and like take pride in what he does and stuff. And like, he put like his name on all of his posters. It was like Sultan son, but he had a daughter. It wasn't until the end of the movie that he like has a new poster made, and he's proud of the fact that he has a daughter. And yeah, and so it's really, in so many ways, like, this movie is about like, yeah, it's about finding yourself, and it's about not letting the world define you.
I'd also say it's about I with that, on that note, it's also about identity. Yep. And stressing the importance of identity, because like you said, like, I think to some degree, like, I don't want to say we live in like this like age of reason now, but I feel like our current societal expectations can limit the possibilities of what a man can do, or a woman can do, or any individual really. And at the end of the day, like, there's a line that Sting says in this. Oh yeah, Sting's in this movie too.
Sting's in this movie.
And I promise he has all of his clothes on in this one. But he says, you're in the beginning of the movie. He says, your reality is lies and bullocks. And this, it's probably not an exact quote, but you kind of also welcome in this conversation of perception, how you perceive yourself and how the world perceives you. And the world is going to come and go. There's going to be so many different people that are going to come in and out of your life. But at the end of the day, like, you have to live with yourself, and you also have to live with the mental health of what choices you make and the perception that you see. And so the fact that this movie speaks a lot of volumes on identity and remaining true to yourself is hugely important. The implications and kind of the takeaway of the adventures of Baron Munchausen.
Yeah. I love too. So like, I feel like the Sally character is sometimes ironic in this movie, because like, she does seem to care so much about the war and about people and safety and reality, but she's also kind of riding the line and willing to entertain Munchausen and believe in him and like what he has to say in his world and stuff like that. But in every new scene, whether they're swallowed under the fish and they go to play a game of cards, or he's dancing with the goddess, in the volcano or whatever, she is always just like, we don't have time for this, we need to go, and the Baron is always just like, oh, everything's fine, there's nothing going on with the war. And like, he's wrong. He's totally wrong. But I also admire it at the same time, people who are willing to just be like, you know what, sometimes there are more important things than what's right in front of us. But anxiety is not going to get us there. And not living like we're not where we are is not going to get us there. And things like that, and enjoying right where we are, savoring it, and I don't want to say letting life happen, but you kind of understand the sentiment that I mean, that like, you can't force everything. And I really love that. And I feel like if there's any Age of Reason aspects that kind of follow along through the movie, it is Sally. But she also kind of has a foot in both worlds. And yeah, it's really interesting and fun. And I find myself admiring the Baron's lackadaisical sort of approach sometimes.
Now, along the same lines, and a movie that I almost mentioned to you, because they are very similar in a lot of ways. It was called Eric the Viking, and it is also sort of a Monty Python-esque fantasy movie, but dealing with Vikings. You've got a very young Tim Robbins, a fairly old Eartha Kitt, John Cleese is in it. So it's got a Mighty Python-esque feel, but it's very much that same reality defining, or your beliefs defining reality, but set up with these Vikings. And I thought about, when you were asking for movies, I was really waffling between the two, but I thought Munchausen, the directing and the sets are just a better level. And I think it does successfully. Eric the Viking has a few flaws here and there, but it's still a very good movie in a lot of ways. Sometimes funnier, I think. Just some good sort of things, but it takes the belief. There are a bunch of Vikings going off to find the wolf who's swallowed the sun, and they take along one Christian Viking with them because he's going to go out and do some missionary work while they're out. But whenever they come across a big dragon or something from Norse mythology, the Christian can't see it. So there's a dragon going to eat their boat, and he's just sitting there and like, what? There's no dragon. And they're screaming and yelling and running around, like they're all going to die. So it's that same, they're really about the same time when they were done. So it's really amazing how they mirror each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's just, both of those things really, both of them stuck with me, but like just the beauty, I think, of the Baron Munchausen movie has always sort of caught me so much more.
Yeah.
And I'll think about it at least once every week, because, it comes up and it'll be Wednesday, and I'll just all day be going, it's Wednesday.
It's Wednesday. That's right. Did they ever explain that?
Yes.
Do they?
It is. It's like, so so the entire movie takes place within the course of one day.
Yeah.
Like, because I kept waiting for there to be like a title card that said Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Never comes. It's only Wednesday. It's just a random Wednesday in the late 18th century.
That's right, because it says Wednesday at the beginning.
Yeah.
But do they, like, I don't know, to me it had a weird, like, because like if this was a Jewish movie and it were Saturday, it would have the same feel to it, right? Because it's like, oh, it's the Sabbath, we're not going to fight a war. That would make sense culturally, religiously, etc. But did they ever actually explain why Wednesday was like, oh yeah, we don't fight on Wednesdays?
There was supposed to have been a truce between them and the Turks, that the Turks wouldn't attack on Wednesday. So the bureaucrat in charge of the city was denying that the Turks were attacking because it was Wednesday, and they don't attack on Wednesday. Therefore, they're not attacking.
Okay, that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. But yeah.
Wednesday's hump day, man. Gotta do what you gotta do. So Eric the Viking came out in 1989. I looked it up while you were talking about it, and it looks like, just like looking at it very briefly on IMDb, it looks very much like similar in tone. It's like what you're saying, like kind of like a throwback to like those like theatrical. And when I say theatrical, I don't mean like theater, like movie theaters. I mean like stage plays, and kind of having that theatricality to it, and that like larger than life set pieces and stuff like that. And that I feel like is kind of like a lost art, really. You don't kind of see nowadays, and it's nice to step back into like an era of like the 70s and the 80s where you can like see these types of movies and appreciate them for the artistry of the time.
Yeah, some of it is CGI these days. That's just the instant fall back on that. It's so rare when it's a physical prop that they'll usually make a point of telling you, oh, we really built this Iron Man armor, and we did all this by hand, just to really stress that, hey, it's not just a computer program on things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think to some extent that's why I still to this day, I have such a soft spot for Jim Henson stuff and puppets. And there's very little puppetry in this movie, but it's certainly there. And that's that whole thing of you can't fake this. I've seen newer Sesame Street, and it's not altogether bad, but there is more CGI than I'd want, and there was the Dark Crystal TV show, and from what I understand, there was a bit of CGI in there too, but that's the whole idea is it's kind of this ironic thing where everything's fake because it's puppets and puppets aren't real, but everything's real because it's not CGI.
See, now I'm just imagining redoing the whole Adventures of Baron Munchausen movie with Muppets.
Oh yeah,
I'm down for it.
I would so watch that.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So obviously, this movie also features, like you said, Robin Williams, Uma Thurman's in this movie, and we've already mentioned Sting before, but Robin Williams, Brian, I know you touched on this earlier, is so freaking good in this movie, and he's not in this movie for a super long period, but he is definitely to me, he was the best part of the movie.
Whoa, okay.
There was a point where I remember reading, and I can't remember exactly where I read it, but it was discussion from Robin Williams that they only paid a little bit of money for him to do it. It wasn't an awful lot. He wasn't that big at the time, but somehow they wanted to keep him off the poster because they didn't want people thinking it was a Robin Williams movie, since he was in such relatively a short scene, but such a good one.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy to me to think about, because in the grand scheme of things, he was coming off of Mork and Mindy, and he was slowly starting to get into the
Hook, things like
that.
Yeah,
Hook. This was a year out from Dead Poet Society, so he was really starting to kind of come into his own with a lot of this his cinematic, his film career. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I appreciate about doing the Nicolas Cage podcast is Nicolas Cage from bigger movies like Gone in 60 Seconds, Con Air,
maybe The Rock,
National Treasure. But then you get into his weird little hidden gems of the 80s and the 90s, and that's kind of what this movie feels like. It's kind of that really just really weird kind of hidden gem for Williams, kind of in the late 80s.
It kind of feels like a hidden gem for the late 80s. In general, if you were a fan of the Monty Python cast, guys like John Cleese and Eric Idle, or anybody adjacent to them, people like Rowan Atkinson or Hugh Laurie, whoever else, there's a great chance that you still wouldn't have seen this movie. There's just that chance. But it really shines. It's got a 91 on Rotten Tomato, which I still have a hard time believing. Not that I don't want it to have a 91 on Rotten Tomato. I love this movie. I think it's wonderful. But it just surprises me that after all these years, people who are known, critics who are known as being very harsh, still hold this movie in that esteem. I think that's amazing and wonderful. And I'm sure, I haven't looked them all up, but I'm sure the Monty Python films don't have that have that rating on there. But yeah, no, you're right. I think Robin Williams did an incredible part in this movie. And I love that, I love telling people that this is, oh yeah, it's a Robin Williams movie, which is not altogether true, but it's like a good hook. And then when people get to Robin Williams' part, they're like, what is happening? What is happening? Like, because he's just so young and weird. And, I think the people who cut their teeth on Robin Williams growing up know Robin Williams as a comedian and / family movie actor. I know I didn't see any of his stand-up until I was an adult, probably. And I certainly didn't realize that Robin Williams is kind of filthy. And this is one of those very few movies that you even catch a glimpse of that kind of humor that was a little bit more natural for him as a stand-up comedian rather than just as the actor that he was known for.
Yeah. So, that thing is going to do it for us. The hot air balloon of women's knickers is expanding away into the horizon. But before we leave, Brian, where can people find out more information about Bare Butt Comics?
Okay, they can find me on Facebook. Brian Wingrove is my personal page, and I've got Brian Wingrove's Cartoon Cosplays, Bare Butt Comics. On Facebook, you can search by any of that, and I should pop up. Instagram, brianwingrove.huh, H-U-H, which is a character from one of my comics, a superpower polar bear named Huh.
Yep.
That's
awesome.
Because of my love for old Abbott and Costello movies. But yeah, you can find me there. There's I tend to go to a lot of comic book conventions in the Carolinas, Virginia, try to go out west to Tennessee. I've been as far north as Baltimore, into Georgia a couple of times. So yeah, just trying to get out there and get my stuff in front of people who want to give it a try.
Make sure that you guys click the links in the descriptions below. Micah, where can people find you other than That's High Praise?
Yeah, dude, you can find me first and foremost on That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast. So yeah, you can do that. You can find me on Instagram at mulletstash and at VHZest. I tried to log into that account and Instagram wouldn't let me. So I don't know what's going on there, but I've got comic things to update. So I'll definitely get up in there soon and update some of my comic book stuff that we've been doing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't use a lot else. If you're local to the Virginia area, or just kind of the middle of the East Coast there, you can likely find Victims and Villains at some sort of event, especially if you help us get there. We've really been wanting to do more conventions. We've done a couple. We're doing a flea market this coming weekend. We have our film festival that we do, our horror film festival that we do in springtime that we're going to be doing this coming year. And Josh and I have been talking about something else as well. So, yeah.
More information to come. You guys can follow me on Letterboxd. I am at Captain Nostalgia. I'm also on TikTok. It's at Gent, Gent Ghostface. And you guys could follow our other shows, including That's High Praise, Abyss Gazing, Animind, and more. Wherever you guys get your podcast from, you guys can follow the parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Patreon. And go to victimsandvillains.net/hope, where you guys can find our mental health resource library, all of which you guys can find in the show notes below. Thank you guys for listening. And the hot air balloon is going away.